Okay, welcome on my behalf. And I have the honor of giving the first talk in this breakfast event. And Håkan and myself, of course, are very happy that it's been very popular. And I think the event, was it actually closed because there were too many people coming? Or?
Yeah, well, we had 80 registrations, so I think, as always with web registrations, there was a certain percentage of no-shows.
Okay. Nevertheless, let's get started. As I said a little bit earlier, I'm going to try to keep this in half an hour, then have some time for discussion, talks, questions, or comments. And then let's try to wrap it up or finish the event at 9:45, and then I guess feel free to grab any leftovers if there are any. So my name is Risto Sarvas. I promised to start this with a kind of an introductory talk. And the question I had in my mind, or I hoped a lot of you have, is it's service design. It's kind of a hyped thing. You bump into it more and more often in many different contexts. So kind of trying to discuss, why should we care about this? Is this really the emperor's new clothes? Is this just regular old design with the word service in front of it? So what's really going on here? And I'm giving my view about it. Okay, a little bit about myself, and I think that maybe explains some of the views I will have in this talk and my background. I have a background as a researcher, 10 years here at Aalto University, especially in the Helsinki Institute for IT. But for the past roughly 2 years, I have been working at Futurize, which is a medium-sized Finnish software company, where I head the UX and service design team over there. And I definitely have these two hats on. I'm trying in this talk to combine both of these. So actually I have a very academic approach into this, but I'm trying to keep it very, very practical for you to get actually something out of it. And well, that's pretty much it. I mean, in practice, I work 1 day a week here at the university. I have a course in the fall and a course in the spring, and 4 days a week I work at Futurize. Well, that's pretty much it. Well, let's get into actually what I want to tell you guys today, or talk about today. I think that presentations don't have enough props in them, so I decided to have one. And before I became a practitioner in the industry, I actually was a digital photography researcher. That's what my research is really mainly about, and I'm still passionate about everyday ordinary people taking photographs. And this is really the legacy of it. Once doing my research for my postdoc on the history of snapshot photography and ordinary people taking photography, I ran into this device. This is the Polaroid Land Camera 1000, also known in the US as the Polaroid One Step. It was released in 1979, and for 4 consecutive years, this was the most sold consumer camera in the world. Why I say this, first of all, is I think this is a good example of design. It was very successful. And the thing about this camera, and why it was called the One Step in the US, is it was advertised as the most simple camera ever. And the way to use this, you can actually see that this is made for a right-handed person, is you point, and then you just push this red button over here, like this, and the paper photo is spit out from the front. So it's really just one button and you get a photograph. And they said that this is the most simple camera. Now, I started thinking about this camera and looking at it, and I realized this is still, in the year 2012, the most simple camera design ever. Now, what's strange about that is, of course, that now it's 2012, and this was made in 1979, so it's 33 years ago, if I counted right. Has our design, if we look at usability, if we look at the simplicity of use, there has been regression. If you take any camera at the moment, any consumer camera for taking photographs at the moment, it's much more complex than this design from 1979. Think about it. You cannot find a camera now that is more. So what does that, it got really me thinking, what does that tell us about user-centric design or designing for usability? That if a device made 30 years ago is actually much more simple than something we have today. How is that actually possible? Well, there are a lot of answers. Does anybody want to venture an answer why? Why have we actually went backwards in our user-centric usability design, or why is this so? Why is this much more simple than any camera on the market at the moment? It's a puzzling question. Go ahead.
It's the spec race that everyone wants to add new specs to their cameras. So they think like more specs means better product, means more people buying the camera.
That's a valid answer. So if
R&D people say that they just need something to.
that's another one. That's a really good answer. There has to be progress. I mean, if we say hypothetically this was the ultimate camera, you know, all those camera R&D people would be jobless in a sense. That's your point. That's a good one. And the other one is your point, of course, there has to be new features about it. But once you start thinking about it, there's actually a lot of reasons why we don't have in the stores digital cameras that are simple as this. And for here, I kind of deconstructed this whole Polaroid camera. All the factors and all the actors, if you will, that shaped this design. So all the things that were behind before this thing came to the market. And you can of course see that there's nothing kind of new about this. We know this, but I really want to emphasize this, that design is the end result of many, many different things. So if we have a look at this, there's definitely the company Polaroid and its whole history plays an important part in why this thing, this physical thing, looks like it looks and works like it does. There's of course the physical artifact, its shape and everything. That was, you know, that thing's going on. There's law and regulation going on in the end of 1970s, going about competition law. There's a whole patent law. And all the kind of the patent disputes between Polaroid and its competitors in a way shaped the outcome of this design. It was designed like this. It was actually marketed as the most simple camera because Kodak's instant camera had one more step. It didn't automatically spit out the picture. You had to push another button. So this was more simple than Kodak, meaning that some of the competition going on and the market, the consumer market for cameras, definitely shaped how this design came to be. So my point here is that design, of course, is once we start looking at it and really deconstructing what's going on with building technology, there's all these factors are shaping the end result. And this device, this physical device, which now I can start passing around, please don't break it, it's not very valuable, but it's maybe 10 to 20 euros. So it's really the tip of an iceberg, that little piece of design. And behind that iceberg is, of course, corporate culture, there's the whole history of a market, history of technology, and so forth. And this is the most academic slide I'm going to have today. And my point being, this is a very long introduction into getting my actual points about service design, but please bear with me. But the point being is that design is socially constructed. Now you have to remember by social here, I don't mean social as in Facebook or social as in a cocktail party, but in a societal way. So anything we design happens in a societal context, and that's the kind of the academic theory behind this, which just means that there are social constructs, the physical artifacts are based on how people behave, how social structures are built, and so forth. But to put it very simply, it really means that there's certain time and place where design is made has a lot of influence on the outcome of the design. Okay, I hope you're still on. Now I get to my point. So this was a very, very long introduction to how I'm gonna talk and my points about service design. And to put it again in a very simple way, my point is that service design is not alien technology that was handed to us from an UFO, but there's actually societal things. There are kind of bigger things going on in the world we live now and in this place that create a demand for another kind of design. And that's really my point here. There are factors and things that are going on that perhaps we need a new kind of design. So you can ask the very good question, what's wrong with the old design? Why do we need service design? And my answer is the world has changed. There are underlying things that have changed, and therefore we need to rethink how we design objects or digital services or digital products. So let's get to the actual points I see. So really, what are the reasons for the emergence of service design? Again, service design didn't come from outer space, but it kind of emerged because people felt that there's actually a need to have new design. Like I liked your point there earlier on, maybe this, you can argue that, service design happened because designer just needed new work, so they needed a new buzzword. So I think that's a good criticism as well. So perhaps my list is not exhaustive, but I think these are the three most important reasons that I thought are worth mentioning. And I think these kind of shape the things behind service design. Why do we have a concept and tools such as service design? Okay, reason number one. I'm saying that software nowadays, compared, let's say, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, is much, much more changeable than it was before. You can do changes much easily because we have better tools for creating software, we have higher level languages, and actually software processes for building software have changed quite a lot in the past decades. And what this means that because we can change software more easily than before, it means that we can take more things into account in designing that software. That's the simple kind of thing. But let's look through a couple of examples, or actually one example. Now you must be all familiar. This is, of course, the good old waterfall model, the old way of doing software design, where the idea is that you really plan everything in advance, then you build it and you test it and then you release it. And the thing that happens here is that you actually do a lot of decisions before anything is actually released, before any real users start using it, or before these things start happening. So you do a lot of decisions before you start marketing the end result. There's actually the real use. There's a lot of decisions made before the business starts working. You start getting revenues out of what you built and so forth. And as we all know, the problem with this is that if we have some glitch over here, if we, for example, find out that no, people are not using it the way that we designed somewhere over here, some of our requirements was totally wrong. People don't need this or use it for this purpose. It takes quite a lot of effort. It takes a lot of effort to fix it. And this is, of course, the problem with the waterfall model. Nothing new about it. Now, I'm cutting corners here, but I say that kind of the new way of doing software design, let's call it the agile or the lean way of doing software design, in a way is simply just taking this waterfall model and making very many small waterfalls consecutively. So the idea being that, of course, you kind of think about the requirements, you code something, you test it a little bit, but you get something released as soon as possible. Point being that you only make few decisions over here. You don't make all the decisions here. You try to figure out what are the most important decisions you want to make, and then have actually somebody use it. Try out the marketing, try out actually use, see if there's any business being generated with this kind of minimal product. Now if we find out then that there's something wrong over here in our iteration, of course it doesn't, at least in theory, it doesn't take much to fix it because we're already in the kind of mindset that we're fixing things. So it's just in the next iteration we take that into account and change it. And this is, of course, much easier and much cheaper than in the good old waterfall model. And what this really means that we can, as I said earlier, this means that kind of non-technical things can be taken into account. If CRM, customer relations management, is a very important thing for this piece of design, this service or this product, you can start trying it out already over here. Or let's say that the logistics of this physical product, the retail network, that's really the bottleneck. That's where you see all the risks. Why don't you take that as the main decisions you start with and trying out? So kind of incrementally build on it. And you can start things like this into account much earlier because you can make changes easier. And I think service design is, in a way, answering this demand that we can take things into account much more earlier. And my example here is the customer journey canvas. And if you're, well, whether you're familiar with the canvas or not, the point I hear is a little one corner of the canvas, kind of stating that here's the more or less the interaction that the user does with the service. But there are, in this tool, there are these kind of placeholders for you as a designer to think about what happens before the person gets into the service. So how are you going to advertise this service? What's your strategy for creating communications and a buzz in social media? How are people going to tell you about this, the word of mouth? Do people have past experiences using a similar kind of service? So let's say that you're rethinking how people buy tickets to the airplane. People have past experiences about buying tickets to the airplane, so what are they? So service design in this example really emphasizes that you have to think about what happens before the service. So all these things which are not technical, are not about the user interaction as such, are emphasized in this tool. So this was reason number one. You should take more things into account, and you need a design methodology, you need something to do that. Reason number two, services are physical. This has of course always been true, but in the context of digital services, what we are talking about mostly in these breakfast talks, it's really emphasizing that information technology is becoming also much more physical than it was before. It's not only the screen of the laptop or the screen of the mobile phone that you people are interacting with. But there are things like walking, there's things like doing gestures, there's things like talking with another real person live face to face, and these have to be taken into account. And in a way, if then we look back at the user-centric design and the way that design was done earlier, it really focused just on the digital user interface and making that interaction optimal. Okay, let's go through an example. This is actually a little piece of design in our Futurize lobby. It is the taxi button. So here's pretty much how it works. You push this button, you get a taxi's number on the screen, you go downstairs, you wait for the taxi, you get into the taxi, and then you get to your destination. Simple as that. So there's no, technically, yes, there's a little bit complexity under the hood, but not that much. The complexity is somewhere else. And here's really, emphasizing through this example why I say that the designing the user interface is not enough. Well, first of all, this user interface, the button and the screen, are in a physical space. They are in our lobby. And somebody actually pointed out to me that they asked the question that, do people come and vandalize this during the night? And I was like, no, because it's in our lobby and that's locked, which is a really good example that you really have to design the physical space. Because it is in our lobby, it means a lot of things for using this service. First of all, it's secure during the night. There's no vandalism. The second thing is that people, let's say there's two people who want a taxi, and one of them is pushing and waiting for the screen to react. Another person comes along, and they probably want a taxi as well. They can start discussing, should we share the taxi? So just having that in the lobby, in the physical space, it has certain characteristic, that space, and that should be taken in account in the design. And then I mentioned there's physical interaction, walking down, getting into a taxi, driving around and moving. And then lastly, technically this is a combination of existing services. So this is actually just built on top of the taxi SMS service that works in the Helsinki area. So this is just used, actually under the hood is a server that is sending text messages and receiving a text message and showing it on the screen. So technically it's not that complex. But because there's this physicality and there's this combination of services, we need tools, we need design tools to kind of picture out how this interaction works when it's not an interaction between a screen and the human's eyes or hands. So this is the service blueprint, as a lot of you probably know. And I think this nicely shows. I drew this out for the taxi button. Here on the left-hand side, you can see in the swim lanes, here's what the customer does, so the person pushing the button. Here's the customer interface. This is the UI, the screen. Here's the server under the hood. This is not really seen. Here's the taxi SMS service, an external service we have, of course, no control about. And here's the actual physical taxi. So there's definitely two real people involved and a lot of physicality. And you can see that kind of our user interface design ends here, is when the person goes outside to wait for the taxi. But the whole service experience, if you will, using this service for this person doesn't really end there. It continues until he or she gets to the actual destination. And this really shows that there's a lot of things going on here. So if we wanted to really start designing or thinking where can we go wrong with this service, you can pretty easily start seeing that, yeah, here's actually the little thing there in the upper, a physical taxi with the same number. That's really the key. If the person doesn't find a match between the number and the taxi, you have an error in the service. So this really shows that the technical interactions are over here, but this whole thing continues further on, and then it's really about human-human interaction and finding the information matching the taxi with the number. So again, service design addresses this fact that there's physicality going on, and there's the kind of different actors, and it's a combination of services. So that was reason number 2. I actually have 3 reasons if I didn't mention. So this is the last one next. Reason number 3. This also should be quite obvious to everybody here. Service has multiple channels. So just simply saying that, for example, if you read the newspaper this morning, maybe you started with the paper copy, continued on your mobile phone in the bus, get to work, open your laptop, and then you continue from there. So you can access the same newspaper through multiple channels. And the design challenge is how to make this a seamless thing from the end user perspective, so that the end user kind of feels that I'm still reading the same newspaper, although I'm using these different ways of accessing it. And the example I use here is a good one. I use an insurance claim journey, if you will. Most of us don't do insurance claims regularly by routine, so it's always a new thing going on. And there's definitely, you want it to be very easy and effortless. But there are all these channels you can start doing insurance claims at the moment. Let's say you crash your car. You maybe give a call on your mobile, or maybe there's a mobile application you can start doing your insurance claim, taking pictures of the car, storing the GPS coordinates and so forth. You maybe get home and then you continue there doing your claim, saying kind of inputting in information and checking whether your claim you're covered or not. Then maybe there's some questions you want to actually phone the customer representative and figure out, no, I didn't understand this, can you explain this to me? You can go to the actual physical office and talk to these people face to face. There's actually the car repair is an important part of it. You need to go there and interact with them. And then maybe in the end you get by paper mail, you actually get the document saying that, this was covered and all is set and here are the papers to prove it. And the journey might be something like this. So you start with the mobile, continue with the next one. And of course, the idea here is that once you start with one channel and you continue in the next, it knows what you already have done. So if you phone, let's say, the customer help desk, and they have no clue what you have done, you have spent maybe half an hour on your desktop inputting some form, that's really annoying, that's not a good experience. So in a way, there should be a single seamless experience, and we need tools to handle this. We need tools to cover it. We need to design to take this into account. And this, what I just drew here quickly, is of course an example of a customer journey map, I think it's officially called, as a service design tool. And as another example of this thing, I took these pictures by Brad Frost. I think he posted them early this year. And he's saying, just emphasizing that the desktop is not the web, and this is really the web at the moment. So there's a lot of different ways of accessing things, a lot of different physical kind of dimensions to it. You can do it through TV and laptop, and not even mobile is kind of a single thing, but there's a lot of variation in the mobile as well. And then his third point is that this will be the web. So it's not anymore the phones and the desktops and the tablets, but things like cars or, well, the refrigerator will have a web access. And you really need to design how people seamlessly jump from one to another. Now that's really the point about the multiple channels. So answering the question why you should care about service design, does it add value to your design skills? Should you think about it? Or is it just I've done user-centric design for 10 years. Why should I think about service design? And here it's just recapping these things. Changeable software lets you take things into account, more things into account. Things like marketing, communications, logistics, all those functions that are traditionally kind of outside the R&D that we mostly work in. Second, services are physical, even digital services, so that's worth thinking, and you need kind of new approaches and new tools for that. Third, the service has multiple channels, and you need to design a seamless experience. which I just talked about. And my point being, again, back to the long introduction with the Polaroid camera, is that these things are happening. Information technology is much, much more embedded into devices and into services at the moment, and that demands new ways of thinking about design. There's more physicality because ICT is more embedded. There's new kind of multiple channels of accessing services because ICT is embedded. And then thirdly, if we look at just the software, which is often in the core of these digital services, ways of doing software has, I think, radically changed in the 10, 20 years. So we need new ways of thinking about that as well. Okay, this is my second to last slide. So then I kind of took a step further after making these, and then I thought, oh, what can we think about the future here? This is a pyramid I think I drew about a year ago, so I thought about reusing it. And this here I try to combine the history of, let's say, user-centric design and the scope of it. So this is really the scope. It shows that here in the beginning we really focus on just designing the best usable user interface. And then, well, actually have the little things over here. Let's put them. So let's say this was about the 1990s, year 2000. So the thing was that, usability had to fight its way and say that, we need to engineer these products, but we need to engineer the usability as well. These have to be usable, these things that we're building. So it's not only the technology, there's a user there, and it has to be easy to use. And that was in a way, the mantra of that time. And then gradually this kind of the scope expanded, in the first decade of the new millennium. User experience was really about, it's an experience. It's not a mathematical formula. We're not engineering usability. It's an experience. There's emotions involved. People make irrational decisions, and we need to think it as an experience, not as something that people come and act like rational mathematic formulas. So that was really the message at that time. And now we're somewhere here, in my view, that we're thinking about services. So really the commercial aspects are coming in much more strongly, meaning that it's not a user, there's a business relationship. Maybe we should call that person a customer. There's actually a business reason why we're building this piece of technology. There's not a single piece of technology in this world, by the way, that doesn't have a business model embedded on it. I dare you to give a counter-example. So what's the next steps, if now we're thinking about this is a broader thing, we need to take these business things into account. We need to take these business functions into account, like logistics and communications and marketing and so forth. So the next is really, I would say, we're designing the whole organization and not only a service. And I think if you have read about the lean startup, and if you look at the buzz behind all this startup enthusiasm, it's designing the whole organization behind this product or service, and not just this individual service as one part of that organization. So I think in a way the next step will be that we broaden it from a single service to actual designing the whole organization that is producing this. And then maybe last or least we kind of recognize that businesses are part of the broader society we live in. And we kind of acknowledge what of course has been going on is that we're actually changing society via design. We're not just changing businesses, that we can actually start changing things. And I think one of the examples here is the activity in the public sector, that a lot of design activities are happening in the public sector for cities and healthcare and all that. They're taking design into account. I was visiting a couple of universities last May in California, and they told me that their departments of, I think it was Department of Biology, was taking design into account. Nobody knew what really meant, but they were really enthusiastic about taking design philosophy into the study and research of biology. So I'm just saying that this kind of design mentality is really broadening at the moment, and we can probably see in the near future more and more people let's design a better society, let's design a new way of voting and so forth, which is of course actually pretty new. It hasn't really been talked like this. And then all these kind of design legacy and the history of design comes into politics, comes into thinking our kind of everyday work outside this business aspect as well. Well, that's pretty much it. I think I'm quite nicely on time. I thank you, and I hope you found this interesting. But do you agree with the points I said? Any questions or comments?
Now it's your turn.
May I ask that how much this physical side of the service design is visible in a photorized campus? Can you comment that?
Well, it's maybe difficult to summarize very quickly. It really depends. You can start thinking about what you mean by physicality. We'll do a lot of mobile applications, for example, where there's kind of inherent mobility that people actually move around with these applications. But does the product or the application, does it take that into account? Not necessarily. But then on the other hand, we do have service design projects where the whole thing is thinking about this thing will be located in a physical space. We need to think, what is this physical space? Who are the people in this physical space? And what are the characteristics? So, yes and no. I would say more, lately more, yeah. It's very interesting, yes. Any other questions or comments? Yeah.
Previous slides, we had three different approaches: user interface, user experience, and service design. So can you give us an example, maybe on one use case, on how it would be different from design a new service or a new product, and how you would design it based on the different approaches?
Well, I think let's use my...
For the benefit of the video, could you just repeat it?
So the question was that how we can maybe dig deeper onto examples of what do I mean by these different approaches in the design. What I'm actually saying that this is all kind of the same approach, but it's kind of broadening its scope. That usability started with a kind of limited box in the organizations of bigger companies, and it really started fighting its way into bigger. Is the camera somewhere? It's right there. Let's use this as an example. So if I'm just thinking about the user interface of this camera, I'm just looking at the physical object and thinking how people will interact this. Now this is a beautiful user interface. It's very simple. You can use it even if you're left-handed, and you can push it. But my design scope is limited into making this interaction as smooth as possible, the interaction of taking a picture. Now if I think about the user experience, then maybe I start thinking about what is the actual context that I'm doing this? Is it, where do people take photographs? So maybe it's a party. Maybe this thing should look not that technical. Maybe this should look a little bit more playful. Maybe we can make it out of plastic. Maybe we can put this little rainbow color over here to make it kind of part of the experience. Maybe people are making irrational decisions when they're buying it, is for example, that this looks really beautiful, this is really nice to me. So it's not more a technical object that the user interface is optimized, but there's this whole user experience of taking photographs in specific social situations. So if that's an example of that. And then if we expand that scope into the service, it's really thinking, well, I already mentioned a little bit, this is of course a product, but in a way you can think about Polaroid photography being a service in a sense that I need to buy these film cassettes. So it's a service. I buy this thing, and then I have this relationship with the Polaroid as long as I'm using this camera, because I need to buy a new film cartridge every once in a while. So there's this whole service that we need to think that people will buy the camera, they will use the camera, they use it in these specific situations, but they will run out of film. Where do they get the film from? If the market is, let's say, here in Espoo, we need a retail network for distributing the film and the logistics and so forth. And then you can start thinking, is this a new market? Do people know what Polaroid cameras are? If not, in advertisement we need to explain them that, you don't have to develop these things. These spit out ready-made paper photographs. And then maybe the business aspect would be thinking that, well, in the case of Polaroid, now that this poor company has been bankrupt at least twice in history, is that people have actually bought the brand of Polaroid, and then they have rethought the whole business, and that we have this brand that is really popular and is having a kind of a rebirth. So how do we make business out of this? And then maybe last but not least, let's say if you want to design society, is that people use cameras to kind of record their lives and record the happy moments in their lives. The pictures kind of depict, in a way, they build up your history, but they also kind of emphasize your togetherness and your kind of social circles at that moment. That's why we use photographs for. how can we design a better world? Let's say, how can we design that people are more in contact with each other through photography? And then we can take that as a starting point, as a value. People should be in this world where a lot of people travel around, live in different countries. How do we make them see more photos and be more in touch? And that could be our design starting point, which is of course very broad. But I hope that kind of gave you some very quick examples of what do I mean by this, having this scope. Any other comments?
I think I love that camera, even though it looks simple, but could you sell it today? You should teach the people think in a different way today, because everybody wants a camera that has this and this and this and this and this and can do 100 things. And the only thing they really do is shoot and press the button. But they want this choice. This feeling gives them that I can make a choice if I want to, even if I never do the choice.
Yeah, the question was, if I try to recap, was it that can we actually make a camera today, or should we? But you made also the point that people don't want simplicity in their cameras, that they more or less want.
Actually, they do want simplicity, but they are faked to believe that if you buy a camera where there's only one button and nothing else, you are kind of a loser. You are a simple person. You need to have a camera with hundreds and thousands of different things you can do, and then you don't use them.
That's a good point, because I think that's kind of the part, if you remember the big picture with a lot of words about this camera. So one of the things is, of course, people's practices and their kind of attitudes. How do they take photography now, and what's their kind of attitudes and emotions involved there? And you made the point that now people think that if I go to a social situation and I want to take pictures, I should have something fancy with me, because that will, in a way, communicate something about my personality. If I have something cheap and something simple, people think that I'm cheap and simple, just to put it like that. But yes, I fully agree. The thing that has happened in photography is all the kind of the marketing messages and everything has been very successful in people thinking that they should have high-resolution cameras with a lot of functionality, and people are not necessarily, in the end, they just use it like they would use this thing. So, but again, that's the thing. One of the key factors, of course, is how people use these things. What are their past experiences, and what's their attitude towards photography in this case, if you want to come up with a new product. You cannot ignore how people use photography now, just because you think that this would be a good thing. Any other comments?
I just wondered how they managed to do such a great product in the 70s without this service design discipline we are having today.
That's a big mystery. I have been thinking a bit further back. Of course, you know, being a scholar in ordinary people taking photographs, the thing is that 1888 Kodak came with the first consumer camera ever. And that's a beautiful service, because Kodak and George Eastman came with the service that nobody else had thought about it, that you could take 100 pictures with that camera, you ship the whole camera to Rochester, they develop your photos, put in a new film, and ship it back to you. So it was not a product, it was actually a service they sold. So I think that's a really valid question. How on earth in 1888 George Eastman came with this awesome service without having any clue about user-centeredness, no clue about service design? But I don't have an answer. My answer is that I'm a big fan of history of technology, because it teaches us and makes us ask good questions like that. Ville?
Possible, I was thinking about the same thing, possible answer to that. Could it be that back in the 60s, 70s, the scope of what you could design was on either, it was tied to a certain product or a place. So it's either a product like that or a place like, I don't know, a restaurant, amusement park, a store. But now, because we do have these multiple new touch points, so suddenly that one designer, what they can design is suddenly the scope is much larger. They need a new sort of term, which is, one level higher on the scope of design triangle. So we need a new term for this, because suddenly, the possibilities have suddenly been expanded so much in the last 10 years that's why this service design has been becoming more and more popular. word for that whole.
That's a good point, but you're not really answering the question, how the hell did they come up with this design without any of those tools? But I do have an answer now, because nobody else had those tools either, so in a way. That's a good point. I like that question. Yeah.
Thinking about the service. This is my problem. I solve it like this.
Hmm?
Anything out of the service.
And I think that's a valid point as well. We should not underestimate things that have been happening in the past, let's say 2,000 years. People have been designing technology for ages, which is really good kind of critical starting point towards some of the methods we use.
It's been very interesting talk, but rather high level mostly. So if you come back a little bit down to a practical standpoint, could you give some practical steps, like if, say I'm a designer, I want to broaden this approach in design I do, or in my organization, or with my client, where should I start? What kind of practical steps would you suggest, or what's going to be the core activities? What can you say about that?
Well, I have two answers. One of them is a very quick one. That's come and join the next talks. I think they will be more practical. The second answer is, I think, in my experience, is really to kind of step in the discussions a bit further. After, at least in our case, in our company, the customer might come with a project and a budget, which means that the scope is limited and they have a lot of assumptions. So, for example, maybe they have never thought about that there's actually a physical dimension into this. Maybe they have not thought about, the seamless experience. Maybe they just want the mobile layer, and then the next project will deal with the desktop layer, and then there will be a third project that is dealing with the phone customer services. And to be honest, that's really one of the challenges we at Futurize have at the moment, is to try to kind of convince the customers as well that, that if we kind of take one step back and look at this as a whole thing, it doesn't really make sense to slice it necessarily like this into sub-projects. But that's why, if I had more time, I probably would have more go into that. For me, the challenges in service design is not that the methods are missing or people don't have the right philosophy. It's that there's still this huge legacy in organizations, and maybe also in some people's minds, which is kind of, you slice things into projects to minimize risk, and you look at things from kind of traditional functions. Here's the R&D silo, here's the marketing silo, that's the logistics silo. The designers are over there, the programmers are over there. And really to have a more holistic thing, which I've been advertising, which is one of the points of service design, you need to kind of break those silos. And that doesn't happen overnight.
So it's all about kind of setting the discussion, bringing the question into the minds of the people
Yeah.
you're working with. It's
And
about the contracting.
yeah, and it's a lot of practical things. And I guess in a way, now that you brought up that question, I think that's the purpose of this service design breakfast, is to kind of evangelize about this thing and start, maybe small things growing, that people rethink about some of the structures. As I said in my one academic slide, some of the social structures that have been, constructed in the past 200 years have to be broken apart. These social structures are organizational structures mainly in this kind of business context that we live in.
Okay, one more question. Yes, please.
So maybe it is related to the previous answer, actually. But you spoke about agile and waterfall, and you brought the advantages of agile. My question was that, are there situations where you really need to apply waterfall? Are there benefits, and maybe you have some examples?
I do think that yes, I think there's a lot of different software, and I think I need to focus on the kind of software we do is, of course, mainly consumer, some of the business-to-business software. But let's think about software which is really critical, for example, for human life. Let's take a hospital environment, or let's take maybe some military scenario. And I think they have different processes in well, so, kind of not, and maybe partly answering your question, I'm just saying that, yes, there are actually different domains of doing design where you might have very different processes just because they might be human critical or they might be security critical in a way that is not really realistic in a consumer domain. It's kind of a...
Basically, yes, only there is a risk for the consumer, then you have to kind of plan it.
Now what I'm saying is that I do believe that software in general is more changeable than it was 10 or 20 years ago. But I'm saying that my example of waterfall versus an agile process should be kind of, you should have a little footnote saying that if you're in the military business or in a human critical domain, please rethink about this so that no lives are lost, if you understand what I mean. If you have a quick one, please.
Also, like, in reply to the question, agile is good in software. The agile requires a quick deployment routine, so there are certainly things you cannot do with agile, like physical spaces, like a part of services. You can't go to a store and change it every week.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think that's a good point.
That's actually the point why agile has become a kind of industry standard, because the deployments with cycle of software has become so much quicker. Like 10 years ago, you had to ship, not 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you had to ship disk, or you couldn't do it like bi-weekly or weekly or daily. And it still is a valid point in different parts of
Yeah,
can deploy daily.
yeah, that's a good point. Yes, definitely the software component can be agile, but not necessarily a whole service. Yeah. Okay, I guess I promised to end 9:45 and it's 9:46.
Damn, you always go over time. Okay, hey, thanks a lot to everybody who came. A few quick things. So can I have a show of hands based on what you saw today? Those who think they might want to come back for another session, please put up your hand. Oh, great, thank you. And those who did not put up their hand, please stay for a while and tell us why, and we'll try to make it attractive also to you. And then those of you who sit on the colorful chairs, could you do me a favor, and when you get up, could you pile them like 5 or 6 high at the same time as you get up, and then it's easier for us to clean them out into the other room. Thanks a lot, and the next session will be in the same bat cave at the same bat time 2 weeks from now, so that's Wednesday okay, hang on a second, can you quickly check the...
Does anybody remember who's talking?
It's the spirit of...
Oh, would that be me?
Okay. 3rd of October. Okay, so that's the spirit of service design is the topic next time. So see you in 2 weeks' time.